Dragon Queen's puppies reject all meals except poor humans. What happened next part? The massive ship floated in the darkness of space like a mountain made of crystal and fire. The eternal flame was the pride of the Draketh Empire, home to the most powerful being in 17 star systems. Inside its golden halls, Supreme Matriarch Yura paced back and forth, her massive wings folded tight against her scaled back. Her eyes, bright as dying stars, were filled with something the Empire had rarely seen in their queen: fear. In the center of the royal nursery, 3 tiny dragonlings lay motionless in their nest of woven moon silver. Vora, the eldest by mere minutes, barely lifted her head. Her brother Duri's breathing was shallow and weak. Little Hana had stopped crying hours ago, which terrified everyone more than her earlier wails. The royal heirs were dying and no one could stop it. For 6 days the dragonlings had refused to eat. Every master chef in the Empire had prepared meals. The finest biomancers had created nutrient formulas. Ancient recipes passed down through 12,000 years of imperial history had been carefully recreated. Nothing worked. The babies would sniff each offering, turn their heads away, and cry weakly before falling back into exhausted sleep. Yura had not slept since the problem began. She stood over her children, watching their small chests rise and fall, counting each breath like precious jewels. She had conquered worlds. She had burned enemy fleets to ash with her fire. But she could not make her own children eat, and it was breaking her heart in ways that no weapon ever could. High Commander Taman entered the nursery, bowing low. He was old for a Drakath. His red scales faded to rust in places, but his eyes were still sharp. He had served Yura's family for 3 generations and had never failed them. "Until now, my queen," he said quietly. "We have exhausted every option within our empire. Every chef, every healer, every scholar has tried and failed. The dragonlings grow weaker by the hour." Yura turned to face him. Her voice was low and dangerous.
"Then we look beyond the Empire."
"Send word to every conquered world. I want beings who know food preparation brought here immediately. I do not care what species they are. Someone somewhere must know how to feed my children." Taman hesitated. "My queen, using conquered species for the royal heirs. It is unprecedented." "The council will object," fire flared in Yura's nostrils. "Let them object. Let them try to stop me. My children are dying, Taman. I will burn this entire empire to ash if that is what saves them. Do you understand?" Taman bowed lower. "Yes, my queen, I will send the orders at once." Across the galaxy on a dirty cargo transport ship, Jinho sat with his back against a cold metal wall. The hold was crowded with other humans, all of them captured from Earth years ago, when the Drakath fleet had arrived and conquered their world in less than a week. Some cried quietly. Others sat in numb silence. Jinho just stared at his hands. These hands had once created beautiful meals. He had learned to cook from his grandmother, who had raised him after his parents died. She taught him that food was more than fuel for the body. It was love made visible, she would say. Every meal was a chance to show someone they mattered, that they were cared for. Those days felt like a dream now. Earth was gone, turned into a mining colony. His grandmother had died in the first days of the invasion, too old and frail to survive the chaos. Jinho had been captured while trying to help neighbors escape. Now he was just another slave being shipped to an asteroid to dig in the dark until his body gave out. The transport shuddered suddenly. Jinho felt the engines change pitch. Around him, other prisoners looked up nervously. Transport ships did not stop during transit unless something was very wrong. Heavy footsteps rang through the corridors. The whole door opened with a hiss and Drakath soldiers in black armor entered, their weapons ready. One of them held a glowing device that scanned the prisoners quickly. "You," the soldier said, pointing at Jinho. "Stand up. Come with us," Jinho's heart hammered. Being singled out by the guards was never good. He stood on shaky legs and walked toward them. The other prisoners watched him go, their faces showing pity. Everyone assumed he was about to die. The soldiers dragged him through the ship to a small room where an officer sat behind a desk. The officer looked at a screen, then at Jinho, then back at the screen. "Your file says you prepared food before capture. Is this correct?" Jinho nodded slowly. "Yes, I was a chef," the officer made a note. "You are being transferred to the Eternal Flame by order of the Supreme Matriarch herself. You will be given one chance to perform your previous function. If you succeed, you may be rewarded. If you fail, you will be executed." Do you understand? Jinho's mouth went dry. The eternal flame. The Dragon Queen's own ship. He could barely process what was happening. Yes, I understand. Within an hour, Jinho was transferred to a fast military shuttle. He sat alone in the passenger hold, still wearing his dirty prison clothes, trying to understand why the ruler of the empire wanted a human chef. The shuttle flew faster than anything he had experienced, jumping through space in ways that made his stomach turn. When they finally docked with the eternal flame, Jinho was pulled out and marched through corridors so grand they took his breath away. Crystal columns rose hundreds of feet high. Rivers of liquid light flowed through channels in the floor. Everything was built on a scale meant for beings much larger than humans. They brought him to a pair of massive golden doors. The guards pushed them open, revealing the royal nursery. And there, in the center of the vast room, stood the Dragon Queen herself. Yura was enormous, easily 50 feet long from nose to tail. Her scales were deep purple, each one gleaming like polished amethyst. Her wings, folded against her back, could have wrapped around a house. Her eyes fixed on Jinho, and he felt like an insect being examined by a hawk. But it was the nest that caught his attention. 3 tiny dragonlings lay there, barely moving. They were beautiful, with scales that shimmered in rainbow colors. But even Jinho, who knew nothing about Drakath biology, could see they were dying. Yura's voice was like thunder, but Jinho could hear the desperate pain beneath it. Human, my children refuse all food. For 6 days they have eaten nothing. If you can make them eat, I will grant you anything in my power to give. If you fail, you will die, but they will die too, so your fate will hardly matter. Do you understand? Jinho looked at the tiny dragonlings. They reminded him of stories his grandmother told, of dragons in old Korean legends. But these were not monsters from tales. They were just babies, hungry and scared and too weak to even cry properly. He thought of his grandmother's words. Food is love made visible. Jinho bowed to the Dragon Queen. I understand. Please take me to your kitchen. Dragon Queen's puppies reject all meals except poor humans. What happened next? Part 2. The royal kitchen was larger than any building Jinho had ever seen on Earth. The ceiling disappeared into shadows far above. Tables made of polished stone stretched for hundreds of feet. Strange devices hummed and glowed. Machines that could reshape matter itself or cook food in ways that broke the laws of physics. Ingredients from 1,000 worlds filled storage chambers that stretched into the distance. Standing in the center of it all was Master Chef Myung-hee, a Drakath whose scales were marked with badges showing 40 years of service to the imperial family. She looked at Jinho the way someone might look at dirt on their shoe. Her tail swished with barely controlled anger. This is an insult, Myung-hee said, not bothering to lower her voice. I have studied for decades. I have prepared meals for emperors and gods. And now this. This slave will be allowed to use my kitchen? Yura's eyes flashed with fire. This slave will save my children. You will give him anything he requires, or I will throw you from the airlock myself. Am I clear? Myung-hee bowed, but her hatred was obvious. Yes, my queen, Yura turned to Jinho. You have until dawn. Make something my children will eat, or we all die together. She left, her massive form disappearing through doors that closed with a sound like thunder. Jinho stood alone in the kitchen with Myung-hee glaring at him. He took a deep breath and tried to think. His hands were shaking. The weight of 3 lives rested on his shoulders, and he had no idea why the dragonlings refused to eat. Show me what you have already tried, Jinho said quietly. Myung-hee waved a claw, and servants brought out records of every meal prepared in the last 6 days. Jinho studied each one carefully. There were nutrient pastes calculated to molecular perfection, exotic meats from creatures that lived in the hearts of stars, dishes that looked like sculptures made of light. Every meal was technically perfect, optimized for maximum nutrition and digestibility. But as Jinho looked at them, he realized the problem. These meals had no soul. They were created by science and calculation, made by beings trying to prove their skill. No one had asked the simple question, what would comfort a sick, scared baby? Jinho thought of his grandmother. When he was young and got sick, she never made complicated dishes. She made simple things, warm and gentle and full of love. Seaweed soup that warmed the belly, soft rice porridge that was easy to swallow, simple flavors that felt like a hug. I need to see your ingredients, Jinho said. For the next hour, servants showed him storage chambers filled with impossible things, fruits that sang when you touched them, vegetables that grew on planets with 3 suns, meats from animals that could not die of old age. Everything was exotic, rare, expensive beyond measure. Finally, in a small chamber labeled Primitive Ingredients from Conquered Worlds, Jinho found what he needed. Rice, seaweed, simple root vegetables, sesame oil, bones for making broth, basic things that his grandmother would have recognized. Myung-hee laughed when she saw his choices. This is what you choose? These worthless plants from a dead world? The royal heirs could buy galaxies and you offer them food fit for slaves? Jinho ignored her. He gathered what he needed and found a quiet corner of the massive kitchen. He refused the advanced equipment, instead choosing simple tools. A good knife, a stone pot, a heat source he could control. Around him, servants whispered and pointed. Some looked at him with pity. This crazy human was going to die at dawn, and he was acting like he had all the time in the world. But Jinho was not thinking about death. He was thinking about his grandmother's hands, the way she would carefully wash rice 3 times. The way she would simmer bones for hours to make rich broth. The patience she showed with every step, never rushing, always present in the moment. He started with the broth. He roasted the bones first, a technique that would add depth of flavor. Then he simmered them slowly with vegetables, skimming the foam, adjusting the heat. This alone would take hours. While it cooked, he prepared the other elements. The seaweed was dried and needed to be soaked. He did this carefully, testing the texture with his fingers the way his grandmother taught him. The rice was rinsed until the water ran clear. The vegetables were cut with attention, each piece the same size so they would cook evenly. Myung-hee watched from across the kitchen, her expression shifting from contempt to confusion. You are wasting time with these primitive methods. We have devices that could prepare that broth in seconds, but it would not taste the same, Jinho said softly. Good food takes time. It takes patience. These things cannot be rushed. As night deepened, Jinho worked steadily. His hands moved with old rhythms, muscle memory from years of cooking. He tasted the broth and adjusted the seasoning. He cooked the rice until it was soft enough for babies to eat. He made a simple seaweed soup, the kind Korean mothers had made for their children for thousands of years. He prepared small side dishes too, just a few. Soft vegetables seasoned with sesame oil and a touch of salt. Everything simple, gentle, meant to comfort rather than impress. Servants gathered to watch. Even Myung-hee could not look away. There was something different about the way this human worked. He did not cook to show off his skill. He cooked with his whole heart, the way someone might prepare a meal for a beloved child. When dawn broke through the crystal windows, Jinho's meal was ready. It looked humble compared to the elaborate dishes the Empire's chefs had created. Just simple bowls of soup, porridge, and vegetables on a plain wooden tray. But the smell that rose from them was different from anything the Eternal Flames kitchen had produced. It smelled like home, like comfort. Like love, Jinho carried the tray himself through the palace to the royal nursery. His arms ached from hours of work and his eyes were tired, but his hands were steady. Guards opened the golden doors. Inside, Yura stood over her children who had not moved all night. This is what you offer? Yura's voice was hollow with despair. Simple soup? Yes, Jinho said. He set the tray down near the nest. For a moment, nothing happened. The dragonlings lay still. Jinho's heart sank. He had been wrong. His simple food was not enough. Then little Bora's head lifted. Her nostrils flared. She smelled something that called to her. Something different from all the other foods. Something that felt safe. Bora crawled forward on weak legs. She reached the bowl of soup and dipped her small snout in. She tasted it. Her eyes opened wider. And then she began to eat, making small chirping sounds of pleasure. Duri lifted his head next, drawn by his sister's sounds. He found the rice porridge and began to eat it hungrily. Finally, Hana woke and joined her siblings, all 3 dragonlings eating for the first time in 6 days. Yura stared in disbelief. Her children were eating. They were eating. Tears, actual tears, fell from the Dragon Queen's eyes and sizzled on the floor. The dragonlings ate every grain of rice, every drop of soup. When they finished, they curled up together and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Their breathing was already stronger. Yura looked at Jinho with something like wonder. How? How did you do what my entire empire could not? Jinho thought of his grandmother. of her gentle hands and patient heart. "I just cooked like someone who cares," he said quietly. "That is all," but it was not all. In that moment, something changed in the Empire. A human slave had saved the royal heirs with nothing but kindness and simple food, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Dragon Queen's puppies reject all meals except poor humans. What happened next? 3 days passed. Jinho stood in the royal nursery watching the dragonlings play. They were stronger now, their scales brighter, their movements full of energy. Bora chased her tail while Hana pounced on Duri, and both of them tumbled across the floor in a tangle of wings and happy chirps. They were healthy, they were alive, and they would only eat food that Jinho prepared. Yura had tried everything. She had the Empire's best chefs recreate Jinho's recipes exactly, measuring every ingredient to the smallest amount. The dragonlings sniffed these meals and turned away. When Myung-hee made the same soup with the same ingredients, the babies refused it. Only when Jinho cooked would they eat. This created a problem that made the Dragon Queen pace her throne room like a caged beast. She had promised Jinho his freedom and a reward for saving her children. She wanted to honor that promise. But if Jinho left, her children would starve. She was trapped and she hated it. Jinho stood before her, small and fragile compared to her massive form. He had been given clean clothes and a proper room, but he was still a prisoner, just a more comfortable one. "I do not understand it," Yura said, frustration clear in her voice. "The food is identical. The ingredients are the same. Why will they only eat what you make?" Jinho had been thinking about this too. Maybe they do not just taste the food. Maybe they taste the intention behind it. When I cook for them, I think of them as children who need care. When your chefs cook, they think of duty and precision. Children can feel the difference. Yura looked at him for a long moment. "You could leave. I would honor my promise. But my children would die. I know. So you are trapped here because you cannot bear to let innocent children suffer, even though they are the children of your enemy." Jinho thought of Earth, of his grandmother, of everything he had lost. They are just babies. They did not choose their parents or their empire. They are innocent. He took a breath. "I will stay. But I have conditions." Fire flared in Yura's nostrils. No one gave the Dragon Queen conditions, but she controlled her anger. "Speak. The other humans in the labor camps. Free some of them, not all at once, but start somewhere. Show that humans are more than slaves. And treat them with basic dignity. Give them enough food, clean water, safe places to sleep. You ask me to reform the empire for the sake of staying? I ask you to prove that your children's lives are worth something better than the empire you are building." It was a dangerous thing to say. Yura could have killed him with one breath. But instead she surprised him. She laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human." "Perhaps both." She thought for a moment. "I agree. I will begin reforms for human prisoners, but you will stay and care for my children." "I will." So Jinho's strange new life began. Each morning he woke before dawn and went to the royal kitchen. He made breakfast for 3 growing dragonlings who greeted him with happy chirps and small roars. They followed him around while he cooked, watching with bright, curious eyes. Bora, the eldest, was the first to start asking questions. "What you making?" She would ask in broken Dracath speech, her small voice high and sweet. "Rice with vegetables today." Jinho would answer. "And your favorite soup? Why you cook slow?" Myung-hee make fast. "Because good things take time, little one. Patience makes food taste better." The dragonlings absorbed everything he said. While he cooked, he told them stories from Earth. Tales of Korean legends, of tigers who smoked pipes and rabbits who tricked tigers. Stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things through kindness and cleverness rather than strength. The dragonlings loved these stories. They loved them more than the tales of Dracath conquest that other teachers tried to tell them. Bora especially would curl up next to Jinho while he worked, listening with complete attention. "Tell again about grandmother," she would beg. "Tell about lady who teach you cooking." So Jinho would tell her about his grandmother, about her patient hands and warm smile, about how she believed that food could heal both body and spirit. The dragonlings learned that strength was not just about power but about caring for others. Word spread through the palace that the royal heirs were learning strange ideas from their human cook. The nobles whispered in corners. The military commanders frowned. This was not how Dracath royalty should be raised. High Priestess So Young came to Yura's throne room to voice her concerns. She was old and proud, her white scales marked with symbols of religious authority. My queen, the human's influence over your children is dangerous. He teaches them weakness. He teaches them compassion, Yura replied. Compassion is a luxury. The empire was built on strength, and yet strength could not save my children. A human slave with a pot of soup succeeded where the empire's might failed. Perhaps that should teach us something. So Young left angry and unsatisfied. She was not alone. In the military quarters, Commander Taemin met with other officers who shared his concerns. They did not speak of open rebellion, not yet. But they watched and waited and planned. Jinho knew none of this. He was too busy with the dragonlings who were growing fast. Within months, they were big enough to fly short distances. They would swoop through the nursery calling for Jinho to watch their tricks. One evening, while Jinho prepared dinner, young Bora asked him a question that changed everything. Jinho, why you stay? You make mother promise free humans. Why you not free? Jinho paused in his cutting. It was a fair question. Because you need me, and I cannot leave someone who needs me. But you sad sometimes. I see it, you miss Earth. Jinho had not realized the dragonlings noticed. He sat down so he was closer to Bora's eye level. Yes, I miss Earth, I miss my home and my grandmother. But she taught me something important. She said that wherever you are, whatever you are doing, if you can help someone, you should. Even if it is hard. Even if it costs you something. Bora's eyes, already wise beyond her months, studied him carefully. Mother says you make us strong by feeding us. But I think you make us strong by teaching us this. That helping others is important. From that day on, the dragonlings became even more attached to Jinho. They would not sleep unless he was near. They would not eat unless he prepared the meal himself. Yura watched this bond grow with mixed feelings. Her children were thriving, but they were learning to love a member of a conquered species more than their own kind. The tension came to a head one dark night. Jinho was sleeping in his quarters when he heard a sound. His eyes opened to see a figure in black standing over his bed with a knife. An assassin, sent by someone who wanted the human influence removed from the royal family. Jinho rolled away, but he was not a fighter. The assassin was faster, trained, deadly. The blade came down, but little Bora, who had been sleeping in the next room as she often did, heard the struggle. She burst through the door with a roar that shook the walls. At only 6 months old, she breathed fire for the first time, a stream of flames that sent the assassin screaming and running. Guards came running. The assassin was caught, and when Yura learned that someone had tried to kill Jinho, her fury was terrible to see. She called the entire court together. This human saved my children, she said, her voice like an earthquake, and someone dared to strike at him. From this day forward, Jinho is under my personal protection. He is a member of this household. Anyone who harms him answers to me. It was unprecedented, shocking, a human given the status of royal household. The court whispered and gasped. But no one dared object, not with the Dragon Queen's eyes blazing with protective fire. Jinho looked at little Bora, who had saved his life. She chirped happily and nuzzled against him. In that moment, he realized something. He had come here as a slave. But somehow, without trying, he had become something more. Not just a cook, but a teacher. Not just a servant, but family. The empire was changing one meal at a time. Dragon Queen's puppies. Reject all meals except poor humans. What happened next part? For 3 years passed like water flowing over stones, changing everything slowly but surely. The royal nursery had been expanded twice to accommodate 3 growing dragons who were now big enough to be called young adults, though not yet fully mature. Bora stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder, her scales a beautiful mix of purple and blue. Hana was slightly smaller but faster, her movements quick and graceful. Duri was the largest, already showing the massive build that would make him a powerful warrior one day. But they were different from any Drakath royalty before them. They spoke 3 languages fluently, including Korean, which they had learned from Jinho. They questioned everything, asking why when given orders instead of simply obeying. They treated the palace servants with respect, learning their names and thanking them for their work. This shocked the older Drakath nobles, who saw such behavior as weakness unfit for royalty. Jinho had changed too. The thin, frightened slave who had arrived on the eternal flame was gone. Now he walked the palace halls with quiet confidence. His hair had threads of gray in it now, and his face had lines from smiling at the dragonling's antics. He wore simple clothes by choice, refusing the rich garments offered to him. But everyone in the palace knew him, and everyone knew he had the Dragon Queen's protection and respect. He had never wanted to be an advisor. He was just a cook. But Yura had started asking his opinions on matters beyond the kitchen. At first, it was about her children's education, then about how humans were treated in the labor camps, then about policies that affected other conquered species. Jinho always spoke honestly, even when his words were hard to hear. And somehow, slowly, things began to change. Human prisoners were no longer starved or beaten. They received decent food, medical care, and rest days. Some were even given the chance to work in trades they had known on Earth. Other conquered species saw these changes and began to hope that reform might reach them too. But not everyone was happy. In the shadows of the palace, anger grew like mold. Conservative nobles met in secret. Military commanders who had built their careers on conquest watched in horror as the empire they knew began to transform. High Priestess Soyoung preached that the old ways were sacred and should not be abandoned. Commander Taemin became the center of this resistance. He was old now, his scales dull with age, but his mind was still sharp and his influence was strong. He gathered others who shared his views, that the empire was being weakened, that the Dragon Queen had been corrupted by a human slave, and that the royal heirs were being taught dangerous ideas that would destroy everything the Drakath had built. "We must act," Taemin told his co-conspirators in a hidden chamber deep in the ship. "Before those dragonlings become adults and take positions of power, before Yura's madness spreads further, we must remove her from the throne and raise the children properly." "And the human?" asked General Somin, a younger officer who commanded the palace guard. "The human dies first. Cut off the head of this corruption, and the body will fall." They chose the Festival of Stars for their coup. It was the biggest celebration of the Drakath year, when the empire remembered its founding. The palace would be filled with visitors, guards would be distracted by festivities, and security would be focused outward rather than on internal threats. It was perfect. Jinho knew nothing of the plot. On the day of the festival, he was in the kitchen preparing a special feast. The dragonlings were excited, flying around the palace in their formal armor, greeting guests and showing off their flying skills. They were at that wonderful age where they were still young enough to be playful, but old enough to have real responsibilities. Bora found Jinho in the kitchen and landed beside him with a thump that shook the floor. "Jinho, you must come see the festival. There are performers from 10 different worlds." "I will come later," Jinho promised, smiling at her enthusiasm. "Let me finish this soup first. You know I cannot leave a soup half-made." Bora laughed, a sound like bells. "You and your soups, always the soups. Come soon, yes?" "Yes, little one. Soon." But Jinho never made it to the festival. As the celebrations reached their height, armed Drakath soldiers in black armor suddenly appeared in the throne room where Yura was greeting guests. Commander Taemin led them, his sword drawn. "Supreme Matriarch Yura," Taemin announced in a voice that carried through the hall, "you are unfit to rule. You have weakened the empire with alien sentiment. You have allowed a slave to corrupt the royal heirs. By the authority of the old laws and the military council, I remove you from power." The throne room erupted in chaos. Some guards stayed loyal to Yura. Others had been secretly recruited by Taemin and turned their weapons on their own queen. Battle broke out. Fire and steel and blood on the crystal floors. In the kitchen, Jinho heard the distant sounds of fighting. His heart went cold. The dragonlings were out there somewhere. He ran toward the throne room, knowing he had no weapons and no way to fight, but unable to stay away. He found Bora in a corridor with Hana and Duri. They were confused and frightened, hearing the sounds of battle but not understanding what was happening. Palace staff were running in all directions, some trying to hide, others trying to escape. "Jinho!" Bora cried when she saw him. "What is happening? Why are soldiers fighting?" "I do not know, but we need to get you to safety." Jinho tried to think. Where would be safe? Where could they hide? But Bora shook her head. "No. Mother is in the throne room. She is in danger. We must help her. You are too young, Jinho said urgently. The soldiers will hurt you. You taught us, Bora said, and her voice was steady despite her fear. You taught us that protecting those who are weaker than us is what makes us truly strong. You taught us that family means never abandoning each other. Mother is family. We will not abandon her. Duri and Hana nodded, standing beside their sister. They were still young, still half the size of adult Drakath soldiers, but their eyes were determined. Jinho looked at them and felt his heart break and swell at the same time. They had listened, they had learned, and now they would risk everything because of what he had taught them. Then we go together, he said. All of us. They ran through the palace toward the throne room. The sounds of fighting grew louder. When they burst through the doors, they saw a terrible scene. Yura was wounded, bleeding from several cuts, fighting desperately against a dozen soldiers. Her loyal guards lay dead or dying around her. Taemin stood at a safe distance, directing his forces, confident in his victory. The three young dragons roared and dove into the battle. They were not as strong as the adult soldiers, but they were fast and desperate. Bora breathed fire, driving back a group of attackers. Hana used her speed to confuse and distract. Duri, despite his fear, put himself between his mother and the swords. And Jinho, weaponless, did the only thing he could. He shouted, "Stop, all of you, stop and listen." Maybe it was the shock of seeing a human in the middle of a battle. Maybe it was the sheer strangeness of his presence. But for a moment, the fighting paused. Even Taemin looked at him in surprise. Jinho stepped forward, his voice shaking but clear. You say the Dragon Queen is weak because she shows compassion. You say the royal heirs are corrupted because they learn to care about others. But I have seen the old ways. I have seen worlds burned and people enslaved. I have seen strength used only to hurt and destroy. Is that really what you want to preserve? The human speaks of things he does not understand, Taemin said coldly. The empire was built on strength. No, Bora said, stepping forward beside Jinho. Her voice rang through the throne room clear and strong. The empire was built on fear, and fear is not strength. True strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. True strength is admitting when you are wrong and trying to be better. That is what Jinho taught us. That is what makes us strong. She looked at the soldiers, many of whom she had known her whole life. You say we are weak because we care. But which takes more courage? To burn worlds, or to try to heal them? To conquer through fear or to lead with wisdom? We are young, but we know this. An empire built on cruelty cannot last. It will collapse from within, destroyed by its own hatred. The words hit like hammer blows. Some soldiers lowered their weapons. Others looked uncertain. These were words they had never heard from Drakath royalty before. Taemin saw his support crumbling. In desperation, he drew his own sword and charged at Jinho. If he could kill the human, perhaps the old ways could still win. But he never reached his target. Yura, wounded and bleeding, moved with a speed born of desperation and love. She threw herself between Taemin and Jinho. The sword meant for the human struck the Dragon Queen instead. Time seemed to stop. Yura fell. The three dragonlings screamed, and the throne room erupted in chaos once more. The sword had struck deep, but not deep enough to kill immediately. Yura lay on the crystal floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps, purple blood pooling beneath her. The three dragonlings rushed to their mother's side, crying out in fear and grief. Around them, the battle had stopped. Even the rebels stood frozen, shocked by what had just happened. Taemin stared at his sword, at the blood on it, and something seemed to break inside him. He had served the royal family for 3 generations. He had sworn oaths to protect them, and now he had struck down his own queen. The sword fell from his claws with a clatter. Jinho dropped to his knees beside Yura. He had no medical training, but he pressed his hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. It was like trying to hold back an ocean with his fingers. "Stay with us," he whispered. "Your children need you." Yura's eyes focused on him with difficulty. "Jinho," she breathed. "Take care of them. Promise me. You will take care of them yourself," Jinho said fiercely. "You are not allowed to die. Not after everything." The palace healers came running. They worked frantically, using all their skills and technology to save the Dragon Queen. The wound was terrible, but Yura was strong. She clung to life with the same determination that had made her an empress. For 3 days, she hovered between life and death. The dragonlings never left her side. They curled around her massive form, sharing their warmth and their will to live. Jinho brought them food, though they barely ate. He told them stories, trying to give them hope. The entire palace held its breath and waited. On the 3rd day, Yura's eyes opened. She was weak, she would bear scars forever, but she was alive. The relief that swept through the eternal flame was like a storm breaking. Taman and the other rebels had been imprisoned. Now Yura had to decide what to do with them. The old laws were clear: death for treason. The entire court expected executions, a display of power to discourage future rebellions. Even the rebels themselves expected to die. But Bora came to her mother with a different suggestion. "Mother, I know what the law says, but Jinho taught us that mercy is not weakness. If we execute them, we prove their point. We prove that the Empire can only rule through fear and death. But if we show mercy with justice, we show that a better way is possible." Yura looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she looked at Jinho, who stood quietly in the corner. He had not offered advice this time, but his influence was clear in her children's words. Finally, she nodded. The judgment was announced to the entire Empire. The rebels would not be executed. Instead, they would be imprisoned and required to serve in rehabilitation programs, learning about the species they had oppressed and the harm the old ways had caused. They would work to repair some of the damage they had done. It was mercy, but it was not weakness. It was justice that tried to heal rather than simply punish. The reaction across the Empire was mixed. Some saw it as the weakness the rebels had predicted, but others saw it as a new kind of strength, one that broke the old cycles of violence and revenge. The debate raged across 17 star systems. Yura used this moment to announce larger reforms. She called together leaders from all the conquered species. Many came expecting empty promises, but what they got was real change. The Empire would become a federation, she declared. Conquered worlds would have representatives in government. Slavery would be abolished across all territories. Military campaigns of pure conquest would end. It was a revolution more profound than any war. The Draketh Empire began to transform into something new. Not everyone was happy. Several military commanders resigned in protest. Some star systems threatened rebellion, but others embraced the changes with hope they had not felt in centuries. Through all of this, Jinho remained in his kitchen. He had been offered positions of power, titles, wealth beyond measure, but he turned them all down. He was not interested in ruling or commanding. He just wanted to cook, but Yura insisted he accept one thing: a small restaurant in the Palace District. "You changed my empire with soup and rice," she said, smiling despite the pain from her wounds. "Let others come and eat what you make. Let them see that food made with care can bring people together." So Jinho's restaurant opened. It was small and simple, with wooden tables and paper lanterns looking like a piece of old Korea transplanted to a crystal palace. The menu was basic: soups, rice dishes, simple vegetables. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Just good food made with patience and love. At first, only the curious came, but word spread quickly. The food was different from anything in the Empire. It was comfort in a bowl, warmth in a spoonful, and more importantly, everyone was welcome. Draketh nobles sat next to human workers. Conquered species from a dozen worlds shared tables. In Jinho's restaurant, everyone was equal, everyone was fed, everyone was welcome. The dragonlings came every week without fail. They were young adults now, taking on real responsibilities in the new federation. Bora was learning diplomacy, Hana was studying science, and Duri was training with the military. But every week they would come to Jinho's restaurant, sit at their usual table, and eat the simple food that had saved their lives years ago. One evening, as Jinho was serving them their meal, Bora looked at him with those wise eyes she had developed. "Do you ever regret it, Jinho? Staying here instead of going back to Earth?" Jinho thought about it while he set down bowls of steaming soup. Earth was being rebuilt now with help from the Federation. Humans were returning to their homeworld. He could go back if he wanted. But would he still be going home? "I miss Earth," he said honestly. "I miss my grandmother and the life I had. But I do not regret the choice I made. You three were hungry and I knew how to feed you. It was that simple. It was never simple, Hana said softly. You could have let us starve. You could have run when you had the chance. But you stayed because you cared more about saving children than about your own freedom. That is what humans do, Jinho said with a small smile. At least that is what we should do. We take care of those who need us, even when it is hard, even when it costs us something. Duri, who rarely spoke much, said something then that made Jinho's eyes water. You taught us that being strong is not about how much you can destroy. It is about how much you can protect and how much you can give. The Empire is changing because of that lesson. Millions of beings across the stars have hope now because you made soup for 3 hungry babies. Years passed. The restaurant became famous across the Federation. Jinho trained other cooks in his methods, teaching them that food was more than fuel, that meals were opportunities for connection and care. Human restaurants began opening across Drakath space, bringing new flavors and old traditions to alien worlds. The dragonlings grew into their full size and power. Bora became an ambassador, traveling to different worlds and helping to negotiate the complex transition from Empire to Federation. Hana became a scientist who worked on projects to restore damaged planets. Duri became a military commander, but one who thought carefully about when force was necessary and when other solutions might work better. And every week, no matter where they were or how busy they had become, they came back to the restaurant. They sat at their table, ate their soup, and talked with the human who had saved them and changed their world. Jinho grew old. His hair turned white. His hands developed tremors. His back hurt from years of standing in kitchens. But he still cooked every day, still welcomed every customer with a smile, still believed that food made with care could change hearts. One quiet evening, as he served the dragonlings their usual meal, Bora said something that made him pause. Do you know what you have done, Jinho? Really done? I fed 3 hungry children, Jinho said, as he always did. No, Bora said gently. You showed the most powerful empire in the galaxy that there is a better way. You proved that small acts of kindness can echo across the stars. You taught us that every being, no matter how small or weak they seem, has value and deserves compassion. The empire my mother built with fire and conquest stood for 12,000 years. The Federation we are building together based on what you taught us might last forever. Jinho sat down with them, something he rarely did. He looked at the 3 magnificent dragons who had once been tiny, starving hatchlings. He thought about the strange path that had brought him here, from a prison transport to this moment, sitting with friends who happened to be royalty. My grandmother used to say that food is love made visible, Jinho said quietly. I just cooked the way she taught me, with patience, with care, with the belief that everyone who comes to your table deserves your best. I never meant to change an empire. But you did, Hana said. 1 meal at a time. Outside the restaurant, beings from 100 different worlds walked past in peace. Some were Drakath, some were human, some were species that had once been enemies. They lived and worked together now, slowly building something new. It was not perfect. There were still problems, still conflicts, still those who wanted the old ways back. But it was better. It was hope. And it all started because a human slave with nothing but simple food and a kind heart refused to let 3 children go hungry, even when those children belonged to his enemy. Jinho looked at the dragons he loved like his own children and smiled. His grandmother would have been proud, not because he had changed an empire, but because he had done what she taught him. He had taken care of those who needed him, 1 meal at a time. And really, what else mattered?